The world, for a glorious 45 minutes, had shrunk to the perfect, repeating rhythm of rubber on concrete. Thump, 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 hiss, swish. It was my meditation, my therapy, my one surefire way to exorcise the demons of a client who thought a more synergistic shade of beige was useful feedback. The late afternoon sun was warm on my back. The driveway was my sacred court, and the 10-foot rim was my confessional. I was in the zone, a state of blissful, mindless flow that any work-from-home freelancer would kill for. And then I felt it, a disturbance in the force, a cold shadow falling over the pristine suburban peace. I stopped my dribble, the ball resting on my hip. Across the street, a figure was marching across a lawn so green it looked like it had been rendered by Pixar. It was Brenda. Of course it was Brenda. Choe president, self-appointed guardian of neighborhood aesthetics, and a woman who looked like she ironed her yoga pants. She was wearing a blindingly white tennis skirt and a matching visor, a uniform she wore for all official HOA business, despite the fact our community courts had been resurfaced into a bocce ball pitch 3 years ago at her insistence. She came to a stop at the edge of my driveway, hands on her hips, her lips pursed into a thin line of disapproval. It was a look that could curdle milk from 50 paces. "Alex," she said. Her voice didn't carry. It drilled. "Brenda," I replied, forcing a smile that felt like it was cracking my face. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "It was," she said, her eyes flicking from me to the basketball hoop with undisguised contempt. "We need to talk about the noise." I blinked. I looked around the tranquil cul-de-sac. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of a maple tree. Somewhere, a wind chime tinkled melodically. The only noise had been the basketball. "The noise? Brenda, it's 4 o'clock on a Tuesday. The loudest thing on this street is probably someone's dishwasher." "It's the incessant thumping," she clarified, her nose wrinkling. "Thump, thump, thump, it's terribly disruptive. My Shih Tzu, Princess Beatrice, has been unable to settle for her afternoon nap." My brain short-circuited for a second. I was being cited for disturbing the peace of a dog named after a minor royal. "I'm sorry to hear about Princess Beatrice's distress," I said, my voice dripping with a sincerity I did not feel. "I'll try to thump more quietly." A flash of irritation crossed her face. Sarcasm was a language she did not speak. "It's not just the noise, Alex, it's the aesthetic." Ah, there it was. Her favorite word, aesthetic. She wielded it like a weapon, the ultimate, unchallengeable justification for any of her tyrannical decrees. "It's a visual blight," she continued, waving a dismissive hand at the hoop. It was a perfectly normal, portable basketball hoop, the kind you see in millions of driveways across America. That faded backboard, the garish orange rim, it lowers the aesthetic appeal of the entire neighborhood. We have standards to maintain. "It's a basketball hoop, not a meth lab," I thought. "It's literally the most wholesome, all-American thing imaginable." Out loud, I said, "It's just for fun, Brenda, a way to unwind after work." "There are designated recreational areas for that sort of thing," she sniffed. "This is a residential street." "You turned the designated recreational area into a bocce ball court," I reminded her. "And the only person I've ever seen use it is your husband, Gary, and I think he was just trying to get away from you." The temperature dropped by 20 degrees. "I'm going to have to ask you to take it down, Alex. Permanently." The smile finally fell from my face. "You're kidding, right?" "I am a firm believer that rules create harmony," she said, her voice turning cold and official. "You'll find that the community bylaws are quite clear on unapproved structures and public nuisances. I suggest you consult them." With that, she turned on her heel and marched back to her beige castle, leaving me standing in my own driveway, basketball in hand, feeling a slow, hot burn of indignation creep up my neck. I looked at my hoop. It had been a gift from my dad for my 30th birthday. It was where I worked out problems, celebrated small wins, and generally kept myself from going completely stir-crazy in the isolation of my home office. And she wanted me to take it down because it was offending her ridiculously named dog and her even more ridiculous sense of style. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. A few days later, the other shoe dropped. It arrived in a stiff, cream-colored envelope that felt offensively expensive. The return address was simply the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association. It was an official violation notice. I read it standing by my mailbox, my morning coffee turning bitter in my mouth. The letter was a masterpiece of bureaucratic nonsense, a glorious word salad of legalese and passive aggression. It cited bylaws I didn't know existed. Article 4, Section 2, C. The maintenance of community visual harmony. Article 9, Section 5, A. Abatement of nuisances, sonic or otherwise. My favorite was the line accusing me of erecting an unapproved, semi-permanent recreational apparatus. They made my basketball hoop sound like a rogue carnival ride. The letter gave me 14 days to achieve full compliance, that is, get rid of the hoop, or face a fine of $50 per day. I stomped inside, snatched my phone, and dialed Brenda's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice sickeningly sweet. Oakwood Preserve HOA, Brenda speaking. How may I facilitate community harmony today? Brenda, it's Alex, I said, trying to keep my voice level. I just got your little love letter. This is insane. It's not me, Alex, she said, the feigned sympathy oozing through the phone. It's the bylaws. My hands are tied. We must enforce the rules for everyone, equally. Equally? Brenda, I can see 3 other basketball hoops from my front window right now. The Millers have one, the Jacksons have one. Even Gary plays on that rickety old thing next to your garage sometimes. There was a brief pause. We are in the process of a community-wide aesthetic revitalization, she said, her voice hardening. We're cracking down, starting with the most egregious offenders. Yours, with its constant thumping, was the logical place to begin. So that was it. I was patient zero in her suburban cleansing. The conversation went downhill from there, ending with her smugly repeating that I had 14 days before the fines began. I hung up the phone, my heart pounding with a righteous fury I hadn't felt since a client asked me to make the logo pop more. This wasn't about a basketball hoop anymore. This was about principle. This was about a petty tyrant in a tennis skirt using a 3-ring binder of rules to bully people into submission. And I was not going to be bullied. That night, I retrieved the HOA Bible from a dusty box in the garage. It was a monstrous, leather-bound tome titled Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions of Oakwood Preserve. It was heavier than a brick and twice as dense. I cracked it open on my dining room table, uncorked a bottle of decent bourbon, and got to work. I read every mind-numbing page, every convoluted sentence, every ridiculous restriction. No fences over 6 feet. Mailboxes must be one of 5 pre-approved shades of beige. Garden gnomes are strictly prohibited. It was a blueprint for a world with no joy. I was getting discouraged, the bourbon wasn't helping, and my eyes were glazing over. Then, around 2 a.m., buried deep in a section about property additions, I found it. The chapter was incredibly, obsessively specific. It listed things you couldn't build without approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Sheds, gazebos, pergolas, decks. It had a whole subsection on recreational equipment, explicitly naming trampolines, swing sets, and yes, basketball hoops. But here's what it didn't mention. It was a loophole so large, so beautiful, so utterly insane, that it had to be fate. The bylaws, for all their obsessive detail about the placement of bird baths and the color of front doors, were completely and utterly silent on the subject of commercial-grade electronic signage. A slow grin spread across my face. It felt wicked. It felt glorious. I pictured Brenda's face, contorted in impotent rage. The basketball hoop was a battle, but I was about to start a war she couldn't possibly win, because she hadn't even known to write rules against it. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened my laptop. The bourbon hummed in my veins, fueling the beautiful, terrible idea blossoming in my mind. I typed 3 words into the search bar, the 3 most beautiful words in the English language. Used stadium Jumbotron for sale. The results flickered onto the screen. My grin widened. Oh yes, this was going to work. Brenda wanted to take away my hoop because it spoiled her aesthetic. Fine. I was going to give her a whole new aesthetic to worry about. One that was 20 feet wide and lit up by 50,000 lumens of pure, unadulterated, maliciously compliant spite. The decision, made in a bourbon-fueled haze of righteous indignation, felt slightly more terrifying in the sober light of morning. I was actually going to do this. I was going to install a device designed for a sports arena in the middle of a quiet, beige-obsessed suburban neighborhood. The sheer, glorious stupidity of it was intoxicating. The first step, according to a surprisingly helpful article on a Stadium Tech blog, was the foundation. A Jumbotron, it turns out, is heavy. You can't just plop it on the grass like a flamingo lawn ornament. It requires a slab of reinforced concrete that could probably double as a bunker. This led me to my first human obstacle, finding a contractor who wouldn't immediately have me committed. I scrolled through local listings, past companies with names like Patriot Paving and Heavenly Hardscapes, until I found one that seemed promisingly blunt. Big Stan's Concrete and Construction. The motto was, "We pour concrete, that's it." I called the number. A voice that sounded like it ran on gravel and cheap cigars answered with a single syllable. Stan. "Hi, Stan," I began, trying to sound as normal as possible. "My name is Alex. I'm looking to get some concrete work done in my backyard, and you came highly recommended." A lie, but a necessary one. "What'd you need?" he grunted. "I need a foundation poured, a slab, about 10 feet by 10 feet, and, 4 feet deep, reinforced with rebar. Also, I'll need a commercial-grade 220-volt power line run to it from the house." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the wind whistling through the phone. Finally, Stan spoke. "Son, what in the ever-loving hell are you building back there? A launch pad for a private space program?" "It's for a very large outdoor art installation," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "A kinetic sculpture. It's very heavy and has electronic components." Another long pause. I could practically hear him stroking his beard and questioning all his life choices that had led to this phone call. "An art installation in Oakwood Preserve." "Right." He didn't sound convinced. "Look, kid, a job like that with that kind of depth and a commercial power run, it's gonna be expensive." "Real expensive. I'm talking about are you sure you don't want to buy a boat instead?" Kind of price. He threw out a number that made my stomach clench. It was clearly a go-away price. "That sounds perfect," I said instantly. "When can you start?" The silence this time was one of pure shock. He had called my bluff, and I had raised him my life savings. I'll be there tomorrow at 8 to take a look," he stammered, his gruff facade completely shattered. "Just have coffee ready, strong coffee." Stan showed up the next morning in a Ford F-350, that looked like it ate other trucks for breakfast. He was a mountain of a man, with a wild gray beard and hands the size of dinner plates. He took one look at my tidy suburban yard, shook his head slowly, and muttered, "Kinetic sculpture. Sure." But a deal was a deal. He took my deposit, and 2 days later, a concrete truck was laboriously backing up my driveway. The sight sent a ripple through the neighborhood. Mrs. Gable from 2 doors down paused her gardening to stare, jaw agape. The Henderson kids stopped their street hockey game, and, like a moth to a flame of pure chaos, Brenda appeared on her porch. Her phone was in her hand, the camera lens glinting in the morning sun as she documented the desecration of my lawn. Within an hour, a new letter was in my mailbox. This one was a notice of unauthorized landscaping and foundation work, citing a rule that probably didn't exist. I used it as a coaster. With the foundation curing, I moved on to Phase 2, the Jumbotron itself, and the people who could actually install the beast. I had found a seller, the Scranton Slammers, a minor league baseball team that had recently upgraded their stadium. They were selling their old diamond vision screen for a surprisingly reasonable price, provided I arranged for shipping. I paid them via a wire transfer that made my bank's fraud department call me 3 times. Now I needed technicians. Big Stan poured concrete, but he wasn't going to hoist a 3-ton television into the air. My search led me to a niche corner of the internet and a company called Epic Event Techs. Their website was a chaotic mess of flashing lights and testimonials from rave promoters and monster truck rally organizers. It was perfect. I scheduled a consultation. 2 guys showed up in a van plastered with a graffiti-style logo. They were Kyle and Josh, and they looked to be about 25, subsisting on a diet of energy drinks and pure, unfiltered enthusiasm. I led them to the backyard and pointed at the enormous, gray slab of concrete. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "Here's the plan. I've purchased a 20 by 12-foot Jumbotron, and I need you to mount it right there and make it work." They both stared at the slab, then at me, then at each other. A huge grin spread across Kyle's face. "Whoa, dude," he said, his voice full of awe. "A Jumbotron in your yard? That is the sickest thing I have ever heard." Josh was already pacing around the slab, his mind racing. "The weight distribution is key. We'll need a crane, obviously, a big one. And the controller interface. Can we run fiber optic to your office? We could build you a custom control panel. We could even rig it to stream from your phone." Unlike Stan's weary skepticism, Kyle and Josh radiated pure, unadulterated joy. They didn't see a crazy person having a suburban midlife crisis. They saw a visionary. They saw a legend in the making. They were my people. "But, why?" Kyle asked, finally stopping his excited bouncing. "My HOA president told me to take down my basketball hoop," I said. They both went silent again, a look of profound understanding passing between them. "Say no more," Josh said, his voice now deadly serious. "This is a righteous quest. We are so in." The next few weeks were a blur of planning. My living room became a war room, covered in blueprints, electrical diagrams, and shipping manifests. Kyle and Josh were geniuses, figuring out every logistical nightmare, from reinforcing the steel frame to weatherproofing the delicate electronics. They were less like contractors and more like gleeful co-conspirators, their excitement fueling my own resolve. Then came the day, delivery day. It started with the truck. A massive 18-wheeler flatbed that had to perform a 17-point turn just to make it onto our street. The driver, a weary-looking man named Sal, got out, took one look at the quiet cul-de-sac, and sighed. "This is the place with the big TV?" The entire neighborhood was out. It was a bigger event than the annual 4th of July parade. People were on their lawns, peeking through their blinds, their faces a mixture of confusion, horror, and barely concealed delight. Taped to my front door was a fresh stack of violation notices from Brenda, including a new one for obstructing a public thoroughfare with a commercial vehicle. Brenda herself was not just watching. She was marching down the street, phone held high, live streaming her own personal horror movie. She got to the edge of my lawn just as the second vehicle, the crane, was extending its stabilizing legs with a series of powerful hisses. "Alex, what is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, a decibel level I was sure violated her own noise ordinances. "What is that? That thing?" I walked out to meet her, flanked by Kyle and Josh, who looked like my personal tech nerd Secret Service. I held up a clipboard with my meticulously organized paperwork. "It's an electronic display board, Brenda," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I checked the bylaws you were so fond of quoting. It is fully compliant with Article 7, which covers property additions. As you know, that article is very specific about sheds and gazebos, but it contains no language whatsoever restricting the installation of digital displays, regardless of their size or luminosity." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a goldfish. She tried to say something about the Architectural Review Committee, but I was ready. The committee's purview, according to Article 5, Section 3, is limited to permanent structures affecting the roofline or foundational footprint. This is a freestanding electronic device, not applicable. I had done my homework. I had weaponized her own ridiculous rules against her. She was utterly, beautifully speechless. The crane operator gave a thumbs up. Slowly, majestically, the massive black rectangle of the Jumbotron was lifted from the flatbed. It swung through the air, a dark monolith against the clear blue sky, blotting out the sun as it passed over my roof. The neighbors gasped. It was like watching the arrival of an alien artifact. With surprising delicacy, the crane lowered the Jumbotron onto the waiting steel mounts on the concrete slab. Kyle and Josh swarmed it, securing the bolts with loud, satisfying, metallic clangs. And then it was done. The crane retracted, the trucks rumbled away, and silence fell over the street. There, in the middle of my perfectly average backyard, towering over my Weber grill and the small vegetable garden I'd planted last spring, stood a Jumbotron. It was off, just a silent, black void. But its presence was deafening. It was a monument to spite, a testament to the glorious things a man can achieve when he's been pushed just a little too far. For a week, the Jumbotron stood silent, a dormant beast in my backyard. It was a week of unbearable tension. Kyle and Josh were running cables, weatherproofing connections, and installing the custom control panel in my office. It was a beautiful piece of tech, a sleek black box with an array of buttons and a single, large, tempting red button labeled Activate. Meanwhile, the neighborhood buzzed. I became a local cryptid, spotted only fleetingly through my windows. Brenda must have been working overtime, because the HOA letters now arrived in batches, delivered by a bewildered-looking mail carrier. I was cited for things I didn't even know were possible. Violation of vertical space agreement, creation of an oppressive shadow, and my personal favorite, intentional disruption of migratory bird patterns. I started using them to level a wobbly table. Finally, the day came. Kyle and Josh gave me the green light via video call, their faces appearing on my laptop screen, giddy with excitement. "All systems are go, Captain," Josh said, giving me a mock salute. "She's ready to fly." "You are about to become a god," Kyle added dramatically. "Or like a really, really annoying neighbor. Either way, it's epic." I sat in my office chair, the gentle hum of the control panel filling the room. My hand hovered over the big red button. This was it. the culmination of weeks of planning, a ridiculous amount of money, and a level of pettiness that was probably unhealthy. I took a deep breath and pressed Activate. The panel lit up, and through my window I saw the backyard bathed in a soft, ethereal glow. The 20-foot screen flickered to life, running through a boot-up sequence that looked like something out of NASA mission control. And then the first image appeared, crystal clear in glorious high definition. It wasn't a football game, it wasn't a movie, it was a single still photograph I had taken weeks ago. A loving, beautifully lit portrait of my old basketball hoop, leaning against the side of my garage where I'd stored it. And underneath, in a simple, elegant white font, were 2 words, "Never forget." I walked to the living room window that overlooked Brenda's house. Her porch light flicked on. I could see her silhouette in the doorway, a dark shape against the warm light of her home. She was completely still for a full 10 seconds. Then I saw her hands fly up to her head. And then carried across the perfectly manicured lawns and professionally landscaped gardens came a sound I will cherish for the rest of my days. A long, piercing shriek of pure, undiluted rage. Phase 1 was complete. The shriek was, predictably, followed by a phone call. Not to me, of course, but to the local police department. An hour later, as I was contemplating what to display next, the familiar red and blue lights painted dancing patterns on my living room walls. A police cruiser was parked at my curb. I opened the door to 2 officers. The first was a man in his mid-50s with a thick mustache and weary eyes that had clearly seen the full spectrum of human stupidity. His name tag read Dave. His partner was young, barely out of his 20s, with a name tag that said Miller. He was trying very hard to look serious, but his lips were twitching, a telltale sign of a man desperately fighting back a laugh. "Good evening," Officer Dave said, his voice as tired as his eyes. "Sir, we've had a complaint from one of your neighbors about your television." He said the word television like he wasn't quite sure it was adequate. "It's a digital display board, officer," I said politely. "But close enough. Please, come in." I led them into my office, the source of all the trouble. Officer Miller's eyes widened when he saw the control panel. "Whoa," he muttered under his breath. "Coffee?" I offered. They both declined. I had a binder ready on my desk. It was my masterpiece, a thick 3-ring binder with neatly labeled tabs. I opened it for them. "As you'll see," I began, my voice calm and professional. "This all started when the HOA, run by the complaining party, demanded I remove a basketball hoop. I found a loophole in the bylaws. Here," I pointed to a highlighted page, "is the relevant section of the HOA covenants, which, as you can see, has no rules regarding electronic signage." I flipped the page. "Here are the permits from the city for the electrical work, all approved and signed. I classified it as extensive landscape lighting, which is technically true." I flipped again. "Here's the bill of sale for the unit, proving it's my personal property. And here's a copy of the city code on public nuisances. The board is not displaying anything lewd, it's not violating any sound ordinances, as it has no speakers, and its light output is well within the legal limits for commercial signage, even though this is a residential zone." Officer Dave slowly paged through the documents, his expression unchanging. Officer Miller, on the other hand, had completely lost his battle. A grin was plastered across his face. "So let me get this straight," Miller said, unable to help himself. "She told you to take down a basketball hoop, and you did this?" He gestured vaguely towards the backyard. That's amazing." Officer Dave shot him a glare that could peel paint, but even he couldn't hide a slight smirk. He closed the binder and handed it back to me. "Well, Mr. Thompson," he sighed, "it appears you've done your homework. The kid's right, this is pretty amazing, in a giving me a massive headache sort of way. He turned to me. Look, as far as we're concerned, you haven't broken any laws. This is a civil matter between you and your homeowners association. As long as you don't start broadcasting anything illegal or creating a public hazard, there's nothing we can do. They walked towards the door. As they were leaving, Officer Dave paused and looked back at me, a glimmer of something, respect, amusement, in his weary eyes. Just a piece of friendly advice, he said. Try not to start a riot, son. The paperwork is a nightmare. I closed the door, my heart soaring. I had faced the law, and the law had shrugged and walked away. The Jumbotron was here to stay, and now the real fun could begin. My police encounter emboldened me. I now had a green light from the authorities to be as creatively annoying as possible within the bounds of the law. I decided to dedicate my programming schedule entirely to the slow, methodical erosion of Brenda's sanity. The day after the Never Forget memorial, I switched to a 12-hour, seamlessly looped video of a crackling fireplace. It was cozy, it was wholesome, it was impossible to object to. But the constant, gentle flicker of orange light, playing across the front of her house all night long, was a form of psychological warfare. I saw her open and close her blinds 4 times in a single hour. The next day I went for avant-garde minimalism. I set up a webcam in my office, pointed it at a single potted geranium on my windowsill, and broadcast a live 24/7 feed of it. Just a plant. Not growing, not doing anything, just existing. The sheer, pointless absurdity of a 20-foot-tall geranium drove her insane. I saw her gesturing wildly at it while talking on her phone, presumably with her lawyer. My masterpiece came on Friday. I installed a high-definition security camera on the side of my house, aimed directly at the one thing Brenda loved more than the HOA bylaws, her award-winning Duchess of Edinburgh rose bushes. I then launched the Brenda's Rose Bush Cam, a 24/7 live stream. I wasn't watching her house, I was watching her roses. It was a level of specific, targeted pettiness so pure it was almost art. The neighborhood, meanwhile, had split into 2 distinct factions. Team Brenda saw me as a menace, a monster who had shattered the tranquility of their beige paradise. Team Alex, a smaller but more enthusiastic group, saw me as a folk hero. Frank, the guy from down the street whose lawn was in a constant state of rebellion against HOA standards, gave me a thumbs up every time he drove by. The Peterson family, who had 6 kids and were constantly being cited for excessive sidewalk chalk art, left a plate of brownies on my doorstep. The tipping point came on Saturday morning. I was displaying a live feed of puppies from a local animal shelter, a strategic move to win public support, when my doorbell rang. It was Mr. Peterson. "Hey, Alex," he said, shifting nervously. "The kids and I were wondering, since you've got that thing up and running, would there be any chance you could, play some cartoons?" I smiled. The Jumbotron wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was becoming a public utility. "Of course," I said. "What's their favorite?" That morning, for 3 glorious hours, the sound of SpongeBob SquarePants' theme song echoed faintly from the Petersons' open windows, while my Jumbotron silently displayed the technicolor chaos of Bikini Bottom. I had created a community hub, and a suburban civil war was brewing. The cartoon marathon was the last straw. On Monday, another cream-colored envelope appeared, but this one was different. It wasn't a violation notice. It was a summons. Brenda had called an emergency all-hands-on-deck HOA meeting for Wednesday night. The agenda contained a single item, typed in a large, angry, bold font. Emergency bylaw amendment proposal regarding the installation and operation of large-scale electronic displays. This was her end game. She couldn't get me on the existing rules, so she was going to write a new one specifically to legislate me out of existence. It was a declaration of total war, and I intended to show up armed for battle. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile beige room that smelled faintly of cleaning solution and quiet desperation. The place was packed. I had never seen more than 10 people at an HOA meeting before, but tonight, nearly every household was represented. The air was thick with tension, a palpable mix of anger, resentment, and giddy curiosity. I took a seat in the back, my laptop bag resting on my knees. Brenda stood at a flimsy podium at the front of the room, flanked by her 2 bored cronies, a meek woman named Carol and a grumpy old man named Arthur. Brenda banged a small gavel, and a hush fell over the room. She launched into a tirade. It was a truly epic performance, a masterwork of self-righteous fury. She spoke of our shared community values, the sanctity of our property values, and the flagrant, childish provocations that had shattered the neighborhood's peace. She painted me as a villain, a renegade who cared for nothing but his own selfish whims. "This monstrosity," she spat, gesturing vaguely in the direction of my house, "is a cancer on our community. It casts a gaudy, unwelcome glow upon our homes. It is a constant, unavoidable reminder of one man's contempt for his neighbors." She then unveiled her proposed amendment. It was a work of art in its own right. It sought to ban any electronic display larger than a standard television, specified acceptable brightness levels in lumens that were lower than a child's nightlight, and required all outdoor lighting to be of a warm, subdued, and aesthetically pleasing character. It was a legal document designed to kill my Jumbotron, and it was so restrictive it would have outlawed Christmas lights. "We must act now," she concluded, her voice ringing with false urgency. "We must pass this amendment tonight to protect the very fabric of our community." She opened the floor for discussion, a smug look on her face. She expected a few grumbles, followed by a swift, unanimous vote in her favor. She did not expect me. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. "Brenda, that was a very passionate speech," I began, my voice calm. "But you've left a few things out." I opened my laptop and connected it to the clubhouse's old, rickety projector. An image flashed onto the screen behind me. It was a picture of my violation notice for the basketball hoop. "This is where it started," I said, turning to the audience. "Not with a Jumbotron, but with a basketball hoop. An aesthetic blight, as Brenda called it." Then I did something she never anticipated. I went on the offensive. My laptop was loaded with a presentation I had spent the last 2 days preparing. I had gone through 5 years of public HOA records, and I had brought receipts. "Brenda talks about community standards," I said, clicking to the next slide. "So let's talk about the standards she's enforced." On the screen, a photo of a mailbox appeared, with a red circle around it. "This is a violation notice sent to the Miller family. The charge? Their mailbox was painted desert sand instead of the approved Sahara tan. A color difference, I might add, that is only visible under a spectroscope." Click. The next slide showed a picture of a garbage can. "This is a notice sent to the Peterson family. Their crime? Leaving their garbage cans on the curb for 62 minutes, past the designated pickup window." Click Kowak. A picture of a small, cheerful garden gnome. And this is the gnome that belonged to Mr. Henderson. It was deemed aesthetically displeasing and had to be removed. He told me his granddaughter cried when he put it away. I went on for 10 minutes, showing slide after slide of petty, ridiculous, soul-crushing violations, a war on individuality fought with beige paint and tape measures. The murmuring in the room grew louder. People were nodding, whispering to their neighbors, their own frustrations finally being given a voice. "This was never about a basketball hoop or a Jumbotron," I said, my voice rising. "This is about one person using the bylaws as a weapon to impose her narrow, rigid and frankly boring vision on the rest of us. The Jumbotron is ridiculous, I'll be the first to admit it. But I had to do something ridiculous to show everyone how ridiculous this has all become. I turned to face the crowd, my heart pounding. I have a question for all of you. Raise your hand if you in the past 5 years have received a violation notice from Brenda that you felt was completely absurd. For a moment, there was silence. Then one hand went up, then another, and another. Within seconds, more than half the hands in the room were in the air. It was a silent, powerful rebellion. The meeting completely spiraled out of Brenda's control. The tide had turned. People started shouting out their own stories. Frank, the lawn rebel, stood up and yelled about being fined because his grass was 3 inches high instead of the mandated 2.5. Mrs. Gable complained about being told her wind chimes were sonically intrusive. Brenda banged her gavel, her face pale with fury, but no one was listening to her anymore. The dam of resentment had broken. Then, a man I barely knew, a quiet accountant named George, who lived at the end of the block, stood up. He wasn't a loud man, but his voice cut through the noise. According to Article 2, Section 4 of the HOA Charter, he said, adjusting his glasses, a vote of no confidence can be brought against any board member with a simple majority vote of the homeowners present. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. George looked directly at Brenda. I, George P. Sanderson of 124 Willow Creek Lane, formally move for a vote of no confidence in Brenda Jenkins as president of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association. From the back of the room, Frank yelled, "I second the motion!" Chaos erupted. Brenda was screaming that they couldn't do this, that it was against the rules, a rich irony that was lost on no one. Arthur and Carol, her board cronies, looked terrified, shrinking in their chairs. George, the unlikely hero, calmly collected ballots and passed them out. The vote was not even close. It was a landslide. Brenda was ousted in a humiliating public spectacle, the culmination of years of her own petty tyranny. She stared at the final tally, her face ashen, then gathered her things and stormed out of the clubhouse without a word. The room erupted in a roar of cheers and applause. It was over. A week later, I sat before the new, hastily elected HOA board, headed by none other than George the accountant. Their first official act was to formally rescind every violation notice I had ever received. Their second was to address the glowing 20-foot elephant in the room. "Alex," George said, a small, wry smile on his face, "we all appreciate what you did. You were the catalyst for a much-needed change. However, we do need to talk about the, electronic display board." "I'm open to suggestions," I said. We reached a compromise. A Jumbotron code of conduct. It could not be operated between 10 p.m. and 9 a.m. The brightness had to be kept at a reasonable level, and the content could no longer be personally targeted at any specific resident or their rose bushes. I happily agreed. The final scene of this ridiculous saga took place a few weeks later. The air was warm, smelling of cut grass and charcoal. I was in my driveway under the familiar orange rim of my reinstalled basketball hoop. I took a shot, the ball arcing perfectly through the twilight air. Swish. In the background, my Jumbotron was glowing. But tonight, it wasn't showing pictures of old sports equipment or live feeds of potted plants. It was showing the opening scene of The Goonies. My backyard was filled with lawn chairs and blankets, occupied by half the families in the neighborhood. The Petersons were there with a giant bowl of popcorn. Frank was manning my grill, flipping burgers. George gave me a friendly wave from his chair. I looked at my house, my basketball hoop, my community movie night, and the absurdly wonderful, ridiculously oversized Jumbotron that had made it all possible. I leaned against the post, a wide, satisfied grin on my face, and spoke to no one in particular. "Yeah," I said softly to the evening air. "I'd say that was worth it."